The Polish-Soviet War had the possibility to change the face of Europe as we know it, leading to outcomes nobody thought was possible. Are you ready? Let's go. The Polish-Soviet War was a conflict fought in Eastern Europe over these territories. Sometimes the Polish had the advantage, sometimes the Soviets did, but all in all, it ended in a surprising Polish victory, pushing the Soviets out, leaving many wondering, what if it happened another way? This scenario was recommended to me by you guys in our Discord server. Join now if you have other alternate history scenarios that you would like to see on my channel. Nikolai Bukharin was a communist leader who was very important in the early Soviet Union. He was well liked and Lenin himself called him the favorite of the party. If Bukharin had been in charge, he would have coordinated the Red Army properly, ensured Trotsky had full control, and prevented the kind of disobedience that Stalin displayed on the southern front. Stalin's refusal to support the main offensive and his diversion of forces to Lviv directly contributed to the Soviet defeat. Mistakes Bukharin would have avoided. But how do we get Bukharin in charge of the Soviet Union? In August 1918, an attempt on the life of Lenin was made, leaving him seriously wounded. But if the assassination was successful, and by successful I mean the bullet goes to his head instead of his neck. Hey, can you aim a little bit higher so you hit him in the head instead of the neck? Oh, thank you, weird compass man. Trotsky is stuck fighting the Whites in Siberia, and Stalin is nowhere near as powerful as he was in 1922. Bukharin becomes the new chairman of the Soviet Union. The offensive into Poland would go much more smoothly and the siege of Warsaw would go in favor of the Soviets, with Trotsky having complete power over the army now. Weimar Germany, willing to salvage some of its losses from the First World War, takes Danzig and Poznan, justifying this action as protecting Central Europe from communism. What are the Allies' response to this? They mostly support it, seeing as the Soviets would be a growing threat to European stability. What would be the Soviets' reaction to this? Well, they would be annoyed at the Germans, but at the same time, they wouldn't be able to go against Germany. It was still full of skilled veterans from the Great War, and, in case of a conflict, Germany could once again ramp up its war economy. The Soviets take Western Ukraine and Belarus, and turn the Polish nation into a communist puppet state. Now, Bukharin would have 3 buffer states between them and the rest of Europe: Poland, Finland, and Hungary. Wait, what? Yep, Bukharin was a staunch internationalist, and would definitely offer significant aid to the Red Army in Hungary and Finland, if not outright join those wars and send troops on the communist side. This was also the reason that the Allies allowed Germany to take back its Prussian lands. Also, since Hungary would be a big fat communist state in the middle of the Balkans, that would probably be the catalyst for the Austrians to join the Weimar Republic, to protect its own people against communism. The Weimar Republic expanding would also have the unforeseen consequences of angry mustache man not rising to power. How does that work? Well, since communism would be such a big threat in this universe, the Allies might be willing to go a bit easier on the Germans as a way to secure an ally in Central Europe. That means less humiliation for the Germans, and they also get some of their territories back. There is no hate and revenge for angry mustache man to cultivate and weaponize. Instead, Weimar Germany gains a lot of popular support compared to our world. But that doesn't mean that fascism is gone. Benito Mussolini would still be able to take charge of Italy. Fascism would be much more of a fringe ideology in this universe compared to our timeline. That, however, would play out in Mussolini's favor. With Italy being seen as a third party, both the Soviets and Allies would constantly try to win him over. This also means that World War II doesn't happen, or at least not as we know it. In our world, Italy got humiliated in the Second World War. But here, without Germany going crazy all over Europe, Italy would be able to arm itself and prepare for an offensive war much later, maybe allowing him to realize his Roman Empire ambitions. Bukharin would gradually industrialize the Soviet Union, albeit not as much as Stalin. Bukharin wanted to give the peasantry more autonomy, something similar to what China has with its special economic zones. This would of course mean less industrial capacity and economic power for the Soviet Union, but on the flip side, a lot of the atrocities that were committed by Stalin wouldn't have happened in this timeline, saving millions of people. Meanwhile in Iran, the Communist Republic in northern Iran has not been crushed yet as it was in our own timeline. Here, the British are wary of the Soviet armed forces, seeing the number of successful victories they had in Europe so far. Frankly, this was mostly an overestimation, as the Soviet army of this timeline was nowhere near as powerful as the British believed. Due to this fearsome reputation the Soviets had, however, the British decide to retreat from Iran and take defensive positions in the British Raj. This leaves Iran open to Soviet intervention, and of course, that leads to Communist Iran. Meanwhile in Europe, the Spanish Civil War goes completely in Franco's favor, as Mussolini and the Allies support him militarily and financially to avoid another communist nation springing up in Europe. With even more power behind Mussolini, he now decides to expand the Latin Axis, inviting Spain and later convincing Romania to join as well, promising revenge against the Hungarians and Soviets for carving their country up. Italy manages to convince the Bulgarians into attacking Yugoslavia and splitting it up. This somehow doesn't raise any alarm bells to the Allies, as they would like to placate Mussolini and keep him as an ally against the Soviets. The Soviets too ignore this, considering this as a case of capitalists fighting each other. In the Pacific, Japan still decides to strike Pearl Harbor, waking up the United States. And while they're at it, they attack French and British possessions in the regions, officially starting the Pacific War. However, since Weimar Germany remained a normal republic, there were no German scientists fleeing to the USA for shelter and later helping create the nuclear bomb. So we can assume that the nuke would come later in this universe. This would probably extend the war in the Pacific by at least 2 to 3 years. Nonetheless, Japan would still get destroyed. In the Mediterranean, however, Italy would notice the Allies stuck in a Pacific war, and together with Spain and his allies in Eastern Europe, declare a surprise war on the Allied powers. With the help of the Spanish, they managed to take southern France by storm and even have mild successes in the African front. But after the Allies mobilize their forces, it's pretty much game over for the Latin Axis. The remainder of this alliance wouldn't be safe, as the Soviets and Hungarians would also declare a war and invade further into the Balkans. What happens now? Decolonization and ideological battles. With France and Britain decolonizing the Middle East, I believe a domino effect would happen, with most of the Middle East turning to communism and forming a united Arab Republic. The Cold War would be very tensioned in this timeline, with this internationalist Soviet Union willing to support many more communist regimes around the globe. However, since the communist threat is so big in this timeline, expect some to swing the other way as well. China, for example, wouldn't fall to communism. Yes, there would still be a communist China, but the Allies, seeing the rapidly expanding Soviet influence, would do everything within their power to stop them from expanding further. They would send a lot of aid to the nationalist Chinese and eventually turn the Chinese Civil War into a stalemate. Remember, this Soviet Union was not that powerful militarily, as it did not have the industry that Stalin's Russia had. So they wouldn't be able to send that many gun shipments to the PRC. In the same thought, many communist revolutions fail around the globe, as the Soviets don't yet have the required economic capacity to send arms to those rebels. The Soviet Union would still be powerful, yes, but it would be kind of contained. So, how does the Cold War eventually go down? With the Soviet Union industrializing more gradually over time, and with Bukharin's more liberal view on socialism, I believe that the Cold War would last to modern day. Think about it. Bukharin's way of industrializing would be slow, yes, but would avoid much of the atrocities committed by Stalin's regime. If this video manages to get 2000 likes, I'll make a part 2 where Poland defeats the Soviets even harder than it did in our own timeline. Thank you once again to Raptoria, Zion, and the 5th account for writing this scenario on our Discord server. Also subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video.